But long story short, they want all of us fighting on the bottom. And so they promoted this whole idea around identity politics and identity until people started caring about Palestinian identity on October 7th. And they showed that they actually don't care. They don't care because that's the wrong identity. So, you guys, I want you to sit back and enjoy this next section of the episode because this goes into what the play is and how they operate. And that should carry us out. Thank you, guys.
The major problem of Israel is with the young generation of the black community. Black Lives Matter starts there. I had last week a dinner, sit-down dinner at my house for 40 people, which are considered the leadership of the black community and the very important people. They can be part of our doing an activity.
Dr. Clarence B. Jones, who wrote the draft speech for Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream. He was his lawyer, he was his close friend. He's somebody that I reached out to. He became a very close and personal friend. Because of that relationship, he published 3 articles at the Huffington Post explaining why their agenda was hijacked. Martin Luther King will turn in his grave if he saw the anti-Israel tendencies or policies that are starting to emerge within Black Lives Matter.
Soon after Black Lives Matter declared support for BDS, a fundraiser at a New York nightclub was suddenly cancelled. The venue's management said it didn't approve of the movement's stance on Israel. Tony was told by his boss, Eric, that the Israel Project was behind the decision.
I don't know if you saw, but this club, ditched a Black Lives Matter event. One of our donors, we just put in a call to him and then he put in a call to the police.
Madam President, for well over half a century, Jews have been disproportionately represented in efforts to finally secure dignity and equality for Black people and other people of color. This exceptional role has long been recognized by civil rights giants like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. For Jews who have suffered so much at the hands of bigots and whose history of persecution traces back to slavery and forced exile from their homeland millennia ago, hostility and discrimination on the basis of physical appearance is intolerable. More often than not, the same racists who hate Black people hate Jewish people no less. Sadly, though, some believe that this is acceptable to express anti-Semitism, to defame Jews, attack their identity or history, or deny their equal rights, especially in Israel, while advocating for the rights of others. They seek to exploit the movement for Black equality or to break deep and historic Black-Jewish bonds. They must not succeed.
Huh?
I'm not a politician. I'm not about a religion. I'm an Israelite. Don't call me black no more. That word is only a color. It ain't facts no more. It ain't facts no more. It ain't facts no more. Buzzing. Radars is buzzing. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Today, it is prohibited, and you can Google this, to do a DNA test in Israel. Totally forbidden. Wrong. It's illegal. It's a crime. You'll be jailed if you do a DNA test in Israel. Why? Because they know the truth will come out. You come from Poland, you come from Ukraine, you came from Europe, you came from everywhere else. And they were the original Middle Eastern Jews who lived together with the Muslims and the Christians for centuries. For centuries. So what happened to a lot of the Jews?
They seek to exploit the movement for black equality or to break deep and historic black Jewish bonds. They must not succeed.
Huh?
Racism and anti-Semitism are fundamentally interconnected, as is the struggle against them. Thank you, Madam President.
Did you ever look up the word black in a dictionary?
For what?
Did you ever study anything that wasn't part of some con?
What the hell for, man?
Come with me. Black, destitute of light, devoid of color, enveloped in darkness, hence utterly dismal or gloomy, as the future looked black.
Pretty good with them words, ain't you?
Soiled with dirt, foul, sullen, hostile, forbidding, as a black day. Foully or outrageously wicked, as black cruelty, indicating disgrace, dishonor, or culpability. And there's others, black male, black ball, black guard.
Yeah, well, that's something, all right.
Let's look up white. Here. Read.
White. Of the color of pure snow, reflecting all the rays of the spectrum, the opposite of black. Free from spot or blemish, innocent, pure. Huh. Ain't this something? Without evil intent, harmless, honest, square dealing, and honorable. Wait a minute, but this was written by white folks, though, right? I mean, this is white folks' book.
This sure ain't no black man's book.
So what we reading this one for?
Because the truth is lying there, if you read behind the words.
The less we identify with being black, and the more we identify with being African, the more we empower our diaspora, the more we empower our continent, and the more we empower our global solidarity. Blackness as a concept is nothing but a tool of historical erasure. It is a tactic, it is a war tactic used to rebrand and redefine a population of people to remove them further from the people that they truly are. Blackness, or whiteness for that matter, does not exist in reality. It only exists under the guise and the lens of white supremacy. The utility of blackness is to convince a population of people not to identify with their humanity first, not to identify with their land first, not to identify with their resources, their power first, but to first identify with their position, with their situation inside of a binary system of race that colonial powers have created. Blackness as a concept is in direct opposition with whiteness. Therefore, for the entirety of history, they will exist in a polarity. Whiteness is nothing but a gravity well that pulls any and everything in to wipe it clean and dilute the true essence of people for the comforts and the desires of white people. If we identify with our Africanness first, there is nothing that they can use to physically, mentally, and psychologically enslave you as they have done before. The more you identify with your Africanness, the more you are equipped to unequip the white power structure of its power and its hold on the world.
The ADL has been praised for their efforts to protect individuals and groups from bias, discrimination, and hate, which has landed the ADL's education materials in the curriculums of public schools, granted them the opportunity to provide training within the police system, and given them sway in the boardrooms of media conglomerates and leading technology monopolies, like Google, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. The scope of their influence cannot be understated. On the flip side, criticism of the ADL involves them being an anti-Gentile, pro-Israel group masquerading as a progressive civil rights organization, which promotes the us versus them narrative that once only consisted of Gentile versus Jew, but has now expanded to men versus women, black versus white, straight versus gay, pretty much any divisive agenda imaginable. The ADL champions. Then labels any criticism against the group they claim to protect as hate speech. But the ADL doesn't really protect these groups. It harms them. It exploits them. It teaches them to view themselves as victims of a hostile world. Without victimhood, without racial provocation, the ADL has no need to exist. So how much of the hatred is real and how much is manufactured? This criticism, along with that line of questioning, is labeled, you guessed it, anti-Semitism.
Who can make war with the beast? There are problems everywhere. International war, genocide in Gaza, the end of the First Amendment, censorship, pedophilia, homophilia, LGBT, all of this aggression. Boys being taught that they should be girls, girls being taught that they're boys. Mass confusion, mass deception, economic crisis, everything we can imagine that can make a world go awry. The destruction of the family unit, mother, father, child, all being systematically, intentionally annihilated and destroyed. Problems. Problems are everywhere. But the question is not, what are the problems? The question is, what is the problem? And the one thing we haven't done is tell the truth about who's behind it. And the truth is that Jews are the problem. First they depict black people in blackface. And now, today you got whiteface. How do you have the commander-in-chief, the most powerful nation on the planet, senile, can't keep his hand off little children? Who's making these decisions? Black versus white versus black, Muslim versus black, Muslim versus white, Christian versus Muslim. Who's doing this? All of us spinning around in a circle. Who's doing this? You know the answer. Nobody wants to say it. I'll say it. And I'll say it so that none of us can deny it. And then we can do something about it. Jews are the problem. So they drop the physical bombs on the people of Gaza. They drop the internal bomb in the veins of the people, Fauci, COVID-19 in America. Same people, same results. Death, bloodshed, genocide. Jews are the problem. We all know that America will protect the Jews from Hamas. The question we have to ask ourselves, who will protect American citizens from the Jews? When the vast majority of the power positions in your executive branch of government is composed of individuals who supposedly make up 2% of the population, but yet control your banks, control your media, which takes the minds of the people and creates the narratives that drive your society to complete bankruptcy and destruction. You have to consider, has your country actually been overthrown? Is this your country anymore? Is this the United States of America? Or are we now living in Western Israel? We look, we say, the Palestinians, what chances do they have? They're surrounded by the IDF on all sides. And we think we pity them. But in America, are we Ameristinians? This tiny minority of well-organized people. At the black world, the white world, the Asian world, the Hispanic world, all of us surrounded. The large majority of the world population surrounded by a tiny fraction were organized and prepared to destroy all of us. if we allow this tiny minority of people to destroy all of us at the same time, perhaps you deserve it. Who can make war with the beast? Let's talk about it.
Like, we're going to be more pro-Israel than you can even imagine. Just to, like, provoke everyone. The majority of Americans are pro-Israel. Whereas if you take a poll of Israel in the UK, it's just pure hatred of Israel. Your country, like, basically let half of Pakistan move in, you know? So you have a different problem than we do here.
The protesters are on a fellowship program run by a conservative think tank called the Hoover Institution.
This is actually the first foot soldier activity that I think we've been forced to do. There's basically just like Noah Pollock coming and being like, look, there are these jihadis who basically support suicide bombing, and they're at a campus, and you have to stop them. So a chance to shout at Arabs? As we're leaving, we mentioned to our boss yesterday that we're going. She's like, oh yeah, that's mandatory. You need to go. Do you know what my worst nightmare is? I'm actually not kidding. It's a photo of Dion and I together. And we're just like clearly identifiable. And they're like, oh, who are these like traitors who sold out to the Jewish conspiracy for money? I'm like, we did. We cost $50,000 plus benefits. So they did a really job of getting me excited to show up and protest.
It's kind of the way you're putting it kind of sounds a bit like astroturfing.
No. This is astroturf. No, this is actually the definition. There's a bus. What does that mean? So it's when you set up things.
It's the difference between grassroots and astroturf.
You're taking corporate money and you're manufacturing the image of a grassroots movement with corporate money by basically paying people to appear as activists.
It's not that astroturfing is wrong. It's just that like your astroturf has to be like committed.
If you do happen to speak with any reporters, just stay on message. And what is that message? SJP is a hate group. BDS is a hate movement. The only other thing you probably want to mention is that SJP endorses violence, terrorism, things like that. And you guys are going to be great.
Hey SJP, what do you think of this? Woo! You agree? Resistance? Child suicide bombers?
Real baby killers, these terrorists. They kill women, they kill children, they don't care about anything. Rape women too, all the time.
As Israel has ramped up the severity of its genocidal occupation of Palestine since October 7, Palestinian people have continued to fight back. And their resistance has been controversial and intolerable to many people. That is especially the case with the favorite tools of the ruling class: media pundits, politicians, and celebrities. These people make up what some like to call a misleadership class. Those so-called leaders who are shoved in our faces as people we should follow, but have genuinely nowhere to take us. These African misleaders who support Israel have become more and more visible.
Hamas must be disbanded and destroyed immediately.
And lots of people I know are confused about that. Like, what are you doing, LeBron James? The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, the most influential pro-Israel lobbying group in the US, has greased the palms of Black Congress members with around $3.6 million since February 2022. They have also historically targeted Black candidates and elected officials who won't fall in line to support Israel. So it should come as no surprise that the Black misleadership class have consistently backed Israel. The truth is that there is a long history of Zionism attempting to attach itself to African people and our liberation struggles. Here's a quick history lesson. It's 1920, and there's a man named Chaim Weizmann who's just taken over as president of the World Zionist Organization. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because it's the name of the organization founded by Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, a political ideology that has tried to hijack Judaism for imperialist causes. Quick disclaimer, not all Jews are Zionists, not all Zionists are Jews. Word to y'all boy Biden.
You need not be a Jew to be a Zionist.
Anyway, Weizmann comes into the leadership of the org, and one of the first things he does is a speaking tour in the United States. He thought it would be valuable to seek out the support of African people in the US and was connected easily to the black church by Stephen Wise, a popular U.S. rabbi who later went on to become one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or what many in the U.S. call the NAACP. Wiseman came up with the idea of going on a tour of black churches, and it was set up with the support of Wise and a combination of individuals and organizations. His goal was to garner public support for the establishment of a Jewish nation. During his time in the U.S., arrangements were made for Wiseman to meet with a number of prominent leaders and other African clergy. At the time, it was really easy to exploit the idea baked into the word Zion, especially among African followers of the Bible. And that's because in the U.S. at the time, you had millions of Africans whose ancestors had been stolen from Africa, forced into slavery, only to fight their way out and find themselves in a living hell. Jim Crow, widespread lynching, straight up apartheid. Unfortunately, it was too easy to convince a lot of Africans in the U.S. that their idea of returning home and the Zionist idea of returning home were the same. A lot of our heroes fell for this political trickery. In 1948, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote an entire address to the American Jewish Congress titled America's Responsibility to Israel. Though I have to point out that he later revised his position on this. And in many cases, Zionists were also able to twist the words and sentiments of such figures after they died to associate their causes with Zionism. By the 1950s, the civil rights movement was in full swing in the United States, and the Zionist cause found some support in the movement's biggest star, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The SCLC was a predominantly Christian organization that employed nonviolent direct action strategies in the struggle for civil rights for Africans in the United States. And out of the SCLC grew a call for a new student-led initiative, one whose youthful vibrance and impatience with the status quo would come to evolve the ideology of the U.S. civil rights movements and buck up against the way the entire country talked about Zionism. Thus was born SNCC, short for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was formed by young activists, including now prominent figures like Ella Baker, Diane Nash, and Julian Bond. SNCC began in 1960 as a political organization, mostly focused on acquiring voting and civil rights for Africans in the U.S. But by 1967, their ideology had begun to adopt anti-capitalism and anti-imperialism. This was largely due to a growing internationalist and Pan-Africanist outlook among its members. Members like a woman named Ethel Minor. As a journalist, she quickly became the editor of the SNCC newsletter in the summer of 1967. This was a crucial turning point in the Zionist occupation of Palestine. That June, the world witnessed the Six-Day War. That's when, over the course of 6 days, Israel captured territories from its neighbors, including the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. In the midst of this, staffers at the SNCC newsletter decided the organization had a responsibility to speak out. As editor, Ethel Minor oversaw a rich print feature, including an objective critique of the facts and an interactive game for Africans in the U.S. to test their knowledge of the Zionist occupation. The ending of her letter from the editor read as follows.
Since we know that the white American press seldom, if ever, gives the true story about world events in which America is involved, then we are taking this opportunity to present the following documented facts on this problem. These facts not only affect the lives of our brothers in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, but also pertain to our struggle here.
The day these papers hit the streets was incredibly significant, because SNCC had officially posed a formidable challenge to the line on Israel held by the establishment of the U.S. civil rights movement. And they pissed a lot of Zionists off too. Like, a lot. While it is true that many Jewish organizations in the U.S. financially supported the civil rights movement, so did many Zionist organizations. And with SNCC's loud rebuke of Zionism, came an even louder snatching back of them checks. Critics accused the language and graphics of the paper of being anti-Semitic, a common Zionist deflection tactic. They were slammed in the press as a Negro extremist group. Theodore Bickel, a popular U.S. singer and actor who claimed to be in solidarity with the civil rights movement, wrote a whole hit piece called A Farewell to SNCC, where he denounced the Young organization and rubbed MLK all in their faces. And unfortunately, when asked for comment on the SNCC newsletter, MLK himself hit them back. This is how Kwame Ture remembers it.
Any attack on Israel, this is a quote, any attack on Israel, no matter how you camouflage it, is an attack on Semitism, is anti-Semitic. Poor King was confused.
The backlash against SNCC was swift and brutal. Kwame Ture, who was the acting chairman of SNCC at the time Minor issued the newsletter, said in 1988, "Once we attacked the state of Israel, SNCC was closed down in 3 months. Not only did the media go on attack, but the liberals, non-Jewish liberals, were jumping over each other to attack us." Though SNCC ultimately met its end, their anti-Zionist contribution to the U.S. freedom struggle birthed many formations. It was the bedrock of the anti-Zionist analysis of the Black Power movement in the United States, from the Black Panther Party to the Revolutionary Action Movement to the Republic of New Africa and the All African People's Revolutionary Party. But it also spurred reactionary formations, like the Black Americans Support Israel Committee, or BASIC. Yes, BASIC. It was founded in 1975 by civil rights figures like A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin. According to both of them, BASIC was designed to fight back against the efforts of newly independent African states that were trying to expel Israel from the United Nations, or at least condemn the Zionist state. Over the course of history, our consciousness of the Zionist occupation of Israel has evolved. But in many ways, we can still see how Zionism attempts to obscure our worldview. For young African people in the U.S. today, it's our responsibility to remember our people's path of radical solidarity against Zionism in the United States.
For over a century, the Anti-Defamation League has cultivated its reputation as the premier organization dealing with matters of anti-Semitism and is almost always brought in to judge its alleged incidents. In one analysis, researchers found that the ADL was mentioned in 2/3 of 46,000 articles mentioning white nationalism from 2018 to 2019. Despite the ADL's reputation in the media as an infallible anti-racist organization, the ADL has long been accused of selectively deploying accusations of anti-Semitism and being purveyors of anti-Black and anti-Palestinian racism themselves. And that's exactly what I saw at the ADL's annual anti-Semitism conference, Never Is Now, held in New York City. The conference began with a few speeches speaking generally about the evils of anti-Semitism, but within a half hour or so, the conference moved on to the real issue at hand. Under the guise of morphing threats of anti-Semitism, ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt began laying out a picture of a world fully gripped by the forces of anti-Semitism. A world where, wait for it, Ben & Jerry's would no longer sell ice cream to Israeli settlers.
Brands like Ben & Jerry's, who knew when they announced that they would not sell ice cream in the West Bank, it effectively would end their presence in all of Israel.
If you're scratching your head right now, I don't really blame you. When most people think of the morphing threat of anti-Semitism, they're usually not talking about Cherry Garcia. So what does this have to do with anti-Semitism? Well, it all comes down to how you define anti-Semitism. Most people would say anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jewish people. This would include acts of violence, threats, slurs, and racist tropes. But for decades, the ADL has desperately tried to attach another article onto the definition of anti-Semitism: criticism of the state of Israel. Ben & Jerry's, according to the ADL, is anti-Semitic because they took up a call from Palestinians to boycott Israel for its human rights abuses. In fact, the entire focus of the conference was not identifying or confronting far-right groups and ideologies, but instead legitimizing this pro-Israel definition of anti-Semitism. Nearly half the panels scheduled for that day were explicitly about equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. The first panel I went to was called New Tactics in Anti-Semitism, and I thought maybe this has something to do with the rise of the far right. Nope. This entire panel was dedicated to attacking a website called the Mapping Project, a website which tracks ties that different Massachusetts institutions have to Israel. Now, even though nothing on the website is factually untrue, the panel felt so threatened by the website that one of the panelists actually said that the concept behind the Mapping Project was the exact same as the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, which was the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history.
The Mapping Project, and I'm going to be blunt, is the same underlying conspiracy theory as the man who murdered 11 Jews in Pittsburgh.
The shooter, Robert Gregory Bowers, was a hardened neo-Nazi who obsessively posted about a made-up Jewish plot to flood white countries with immigrants. While the panel about the Mapping Project went on for about an hour, there was not a single mention of white supremacist groups on a panel called New Tactics in Anti-Semitism. The next panel I went to was dedicated solely to whether or not criticism of Israel can be differentiated from anti-Semitism. On this panel, the moderator came up with all kinds of scenarios where the panelists were supposed to decide whether certain criticisms of Israel were anti-Semitic or legitimate. So, is it possible to not be anti-Semitic while criticizing Israel? Apparently not. Every single scenario presented to the panelists was called anti-Semitic. And while I could go through each of the different scenarios, the most memorable was that opposing weapons transfers to Israel was anti-Semitic because...
What do these people want? More dead Jews?
I'm sure to most of you it's clear that this is ridiculous, but part of the problem is that this conference was explicitly targeted at middle school and high school students who got in for free.
Our goal is to prepare our children before they ever get to the college campus on how to deal with anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
In practice, this meant that you had incredibly young people who are highly impressionable hearing this completely biased definition of anti-Semitism from people they saw as absolute authorities. One of the biggest issues in the ADL's eyes was that certain unnamed marginalized groups have allegedly become the biggest purveyors of anti-Semitism.
Certain marginalized groups seem to be some of the biggest offenders of anti-Semitism. People don't want to talk about that.
And what's really sad is that so many other minority groups have joined this bandwagon, that a lot of the national anti-Israel organizations have made it their cause for the last 20 years to equate the Palestinian problem with the problems of racism in this country. It is not a racial conflict. And those kinds of equations are just stupid. Right. And they don't belong on campus.
The implication that black people are somehow the face of anti-Semitism has been a consistent theme throughout the history of the ADL. In 2019, the ADL smeared Ilhan Omar as an anti-Semite for tweeting out that the American Israel Political Affairs Committee donating to politicians might have an impact on their positions on Israel. In 2018, the ADL led a campaign against then CNN commentator Mark Lamont Hill for saying, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which the ADL said was a coded message that secretly meant that Hill wanted to destroy the state of Israel. The ADL campaign got Hill fired from CNN. Going back to the 1980s, the ADL blocked anti-racist school curricula prepared by the National Anti-Klan Network because they deemed it too radical. And in 1967, the ADL compared the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to a black version of the KKK because of its support for Palestine. To this day, the ADL still conditions its support for black liberation movements on whether or not they support Israel. In 2016, the ADL denounced the Black Lives Matter movement after BLM released a policy platform criticizing Israel. Despite releasing multiple statements condemning the murder of George Floyd, the ADL will never tell you that they're one of the largest non-governmental sponsors of police exchanges between the United States and Israel, where repressive policing tactics are exchanged. So it really comes as no surprise that there's been a historically instinctive solidarity between anti-racist and Palestinian protesters facing off against tear gas and repression. Historically, white Europeans have always been the main purveyors of anti-Semitism, not black people. But for an organization hell-bent on blurring the connection between the Palestinian struggle and the struggle of other oppressed nationalities, the long history of black Palestinian solidarity constitutes a tremendous threat. This strong support for Palestine among oppressed nationalities is also why there's so many white nationalists who, despite their vicious anti-Semitism, support Israel. Richard Spencer, who famously sig-heiled Trump's 2016 presidential victory, is actually an outspoken supporter of Israel. Why? Because, in his own words, Israel resembles the type of white-only ethno-state he wants to create in the US. Israel is a two-tiered legal system, one set of rule for Jews and another for Arabs. Israel has Jewish-only roads and Jewish-only schools. Jews have one type of ID while Arabs have another. Israelis are free to travel anywhere in Palestine, whereas Arabs are forced to apply for travel permits and endure brutal and humiliating checkpoints. The legal system also fosters a deeply racist mentality towards Arabs. Polls show that about half of Israeli high schoolers don't think Arabs should have the right to vote. Another poll showed that almost half of Israeli Jews don't want Arabs teaching their kids. It's basically an Israeli version of Jim Crow. After publishing a video titled 10 Reasons I Hate the Jews, Gavin McInnes, founder of the Proud Boys, declared that he likes Israel as, quote, more than a friend, and that they should stop apologizing for everything, like their immigration policy. Israel's immigration policy towards non-Jews is incredibly harsh, especially towards Africans. In 2015, Israel passed a law that would require non-Jewish African migrants to either leave Israel or go to prison. And Israeli politicians often liken African migrants to a cancer on Israeli society. Even Jonathan Greenblatt himself, for all the lip service he gives about opposing Trump's racism, was happy to accept the Trump administration's invitation to see the U.S. Embassy to Israel move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. White supremacists correctly see Israel as a racist Jewish supremacist state. They celebrate the European colonization of Palestine for the same reason they celebrate Europe's conquest of the Americas. And they admire the way the state of Israel has made the indigenous Arabs a subjugated class on their own land. But for the ADL, supporting a country admired by white supremacists for being a model ethno-state is apparently not a contradiction. Likewise, Israel's consistent support for white supremacist ethno-states also didn't seem to register as a cause for concern for the self-proclaimed anti-Semitism watchdog. Israel was one of the few countries in the world to recognize the legitimacy of apartheid South Africa. Initially, Israel was hostile towards South Africa because so many leading figures in the South African government supported the Nazis. But it eventually got over it as Israel realized that it had far more in common with South Africa as a fellow apartheid state than they had differences. The two countries signed a secret agreement in 1975 to exchange weapons when both countries were under international arms embargoes for their violations of international law. While Israel went to great lengths to try to cover up this relationship, recently uncovered documents indicate that Israel offered to sell apartheid South Africa nuclear weapons. It's widely believed that the 1979 Vila incident, where U.S. satellites detected an explosion off of South Africa's coast, was actually a joint Israeli-South African nuclear weapons test. While the U.S. government's official story was that the explosion was possibly a meteorite hitting the Earth, several nuclear scientists and U.S. intelligence agents said the commission investigating the explosion was set up to arrive at a non-nuclear explanation so the U.S. wouldn't have to sanction Israel for violating the Limited Test Ban Treaty. Israel also played a major role in arming Rhodesia, the name of a British settler colony and apartheid state that occupied present-day Zimbabwe. While Israel publicly condemned Rhodesia, privately, Israel was pouring weapons into Rhodesia in a desperate attempt to prop up the apartheid regime, which, like South Africa, couldn't buy weapons due to international sanctions. Israel gave Rhodesia the license to manufacture the infamous Israeli Uzi submachine gun, which Rhodesians renamed the Ruzi, and exclusively sold it to its white citizens. Israel also used private companies to hide sales of Bell 205 helicopters to Rhodesia, using apartheid South Africa as a supply route. These helicopters, which were being converted into gunships, were the single most important weapon in the Rhodesian government's war against African liberation fighters, and it was Israel who helped them acquire them. Today, Israel still helps give cover to white supremacists outside of its own territory. In December, Israel welcomed a delegation from the Ukrainian Azov Battalion, a special forces detachment in the Ukrainian military most known for its support for Nazism. The insignia of the Azov Battalion is the Wolfsangel, an ancient European symbol most notably appropriated by the Nazis. Several divisions of the Waffen-SS used the Wolfsangel as their logo. An earlier version of the Azov logo featured an even more overtly white supremacist symbol, the Sonnenrad, or Black Sun. The Sonnenrad was also appropriated and used by Nazis, and today is a symbol widely used by neo-Nazi groups. Peyton Gendron, the white supremacist murderer who carried out a mass shooting targeting black people in Buffalo, New York, wore this symbol in a photo he took of himself while wearing a tactical vest. The symbol also appeared on the cover of the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto, titled The Great Replacement. Ironically, both of these symbols are identified as anti-Semitic hate symbols on the ADL's website. Despite the fact that you can find dozens of images online of members of the Azov battalion waving swastikas and throwing up the Sig Heil salute, Israeli politicians and soldiers happily met with these anti-Semites. Since the war in Ukraine began, Western governments and media outlets have been working overtime to downplay the Azov battalion's clear ties to Nazism. Instead of condemning the Western media's attempt to whitewash the Azov battalion, the ADL obediently followed this trend by rewriting its own understanding of the battalion. Until recently, the ADL correctly recognized Azov's far-right tendencies and wrote a report that included details of its ties to fascist groups in America. But in December, the ADL responded to a hate incident reported by the Gray Zone to the ADL, in which a member of the Azov battalion who donned the supremacist Sonnenrad tattoo was hosted and honored at a Pentagon-funded sports competition. Instead of condemning the competition for hosting a Nazi, the ADL responded 60 days after the inquiry, saying that the Azov battalion was actually no longer an anti-Semitic organization. Try telling that to the Azov guy with a Nazi tattoo. Anti-war activists have repeatedly warned that heavy weapons sent to Ukraine would inevitably end up in the hands of far-right groups like the Azov battalion. In fact, there's a video of a Ukrainian neo-Nazi group, C-14, bragging about how they'd siphon off many of the weapons sent to Ukraine by Western countries.
Уявіть собі, скільки в нас зброї, скільки в нас ветеранів. А це вже йдеться про те, що нові політичні альянси вже глобального рівня, нові політичні виклики.
According to the ADL's own website, the Azov battalion hosts white supremacist groups from around the world, including the United States, so they can fight in the Donbass, gain combat experience, and take it home with them. You can find tons of articles online documenting this connection, and even the US government, which has been the biggest military backer of Ukraine, was concerned about white supremacists in the US traveling to Ukraine to connect with white supremacists there. Despite all of the evidence of neo-Nazis treating Ukraine like an international training ground, the ADL invited a speaker from Ukraine to their conference to ask the attendees to pressure Washington to send even more weapons to Ukraine. You gotta ask yourself if it's actually beneficial to young Jews to scaremonger about this fake threat of Palestinians when there's very real anti-Semitism out there. But it's clear that this completely warped view of anti-Semitism is no accident. The ADL wants Jews to believe that the biggest threats to Jewish people are the ice cream boycott and the proliferation of Levantine history. Because if they actually had to criticize all anti-Semitism, white nationalism, and Nazism, they'd have to criticize Israel and all of its racist allies. The fact of the matter is, the ADL is nothing more than a well-funded PR campaign for a rogue apartheid state that's lost all international legitimacy. The increasingly desperate rhetoric coming from the ADL reflects an increasingly desperate situation for a country trying to maintain colonialism in a world that will no longer...
Little Mary Bacon, she went to town one day. She went to the pencil factory to get her little pay. She left her home at 7. She kissed her mother goodbye. Not one time did the poor child think that she was going to die. Then a villain met her with a brutal heart, we know. He smiled and said to Mary, "You'll go home no more." He sneaked along behind her till she reached the metal room. He laughed and said, "Little Mary, you've met your fatal doom." Mutely was the watchman, and when he wound the key, away down in the basement, little Mary he could see. He called for the policemen, their names I do not know. They came to the pencil factory and told Newt he must go. Her mother sits a-weeping, she weeps and moans all day. She prays to meet her baby in a better world someday. Judge Long passed the sentence, you bet he did not fail. Solicitor Hugh Dorsey, he sent the brute to jail. Astonished at the question, the angels they did say, why he killed poor Mary upon one holiday. Now come all you good people, wherever you may be, supposing little Mary belonged to you or me.
They stole our Jewish name. They stole my identity. They are not the real Jews. To Gilad, the fact that I was robbed is not nearly as bad as what the robbers did with my credit card. You know what? Maybe. My concern as somebody whose identity was robbed is not what the robbers did with my birth certificate. It's the fact that they stole my birth certificate, and because of that, number one, we Jews are blamed for anybody that has complaints against the Zionists. There's a second problem with the Israeli identity theft. We have people like Gilad, good people, who now want to throw away...
What about, you don't agree that...
who want to throw away their Jewishness because they were led to believe that Jewishness is some kind of identity, some kind of political identity.
I do think that the ADL helps to reinforce our Jewish identity because we're not Orthodox and we don't have a religious Jewish life. The ADL provides a forum to be Jewish. I mean, it certainly is 99.9% Jewish, and it gives us an opportunity to explore being Jewish, to look at Jewish issues, and it does reinforce our Jewish identity.
And you know what? If that was Jewishness, I'd be a self-hating Jew too. The Jew that he hates in him, I hate also. But that's not what I call a Jew.
Hey guys, if you want to watch more clips, click here.
And if you want to watch the full podcast, click right here.